Welcome to Sew with Monty. I'm going to do a little demo here today, just a quick one, because I think pant cuffs are an issue that sometimes can get confusing. They look a little simple, but when you, let's say you want to add a pant cuff to a pair of pants that really doesn't have a cuff, I'm going to show you the different areas that you need to consider so that you don't cut it too short, which is most commonly done, and you'll feel more confident about adding a cuff to a pair of pants. So this is our little pattern template, and what this represents, this would be the body, the leg of the pant right here. This is the actual hemline. So if you're pairing this to a pair of pants that has a hemline on it, this would be where you would fold up your hem right here, this line. So that's very key. The next part is the inside area of the cuff. So this is 1.5 inch cuff, so from here to here is 1.5 inches. This represents the fold line on the top edge of the cuff. This is the outside of the cuff, again 1.5 inches. The remainder of this section here is the actual hem allowance. Okay, so here we are. This is it on the fabric. Now I've folded the fabric and I've cut this with, placed on the fold. So it was like this, and I cut it like this so that I would have a full opening that would represent a leg. Now I've marked the same lines here on the inside of my fabric that I have here, so it keeps me straight. Now you don't have to do this and write every word here, but you should in chalk or a fabric pencil make your lines, because it'll make this a lot easier to do. This being the body of the pant, this is the inside cuff, the outside cuff, and the hem allowance. The hem line and the cuff fold. This would be folded up for the hem. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to sew this up into a circle using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press it open. And then we'll get back together and I'll show you how to do the folding and sew the cuff. I've sewn this little seam together, so now I have a tube that would represent the opening of a leg. I've used a 1/2 inch seam allowance and just pressed it open flat for this demonstration. Now, to make the cuff, this is where it gets a little confusing, where to fold first. The first fold you make when you're doing a cuff on a pant is not the hemline. It's the actual cuff fold. This represents the top edge of the cuff. So when you do this, you want to fold right along this line right here. And now if you find it's easier to mark it on the right side of your goods, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure whatever you're using to mark with comes out cleanly and doesn't leave a mark on your fabric. So if it's chalk, make sure it doesn't stain. And if it's a pencil, make sure it will come out. So I'm folding it along that cuff fold line. This line right here. Not the hem line, but the actual cuff fold line. So I'm just holding it like this, pinching it and turning it up. Now, once I get it all turned up nice and neat like this, and I'm just putting my pins in, making sure I'm neat all the way around and nice and even. So I've got 4 pins in here. Let me get this one straight, it's a little bit crooked. So I've got 4 pins in here right on my cuff fold line. So this is the top edge of my cuff that I'm talking about. Now we want to press this area. Now when I press it, I don't press creases on my folded areas. I just press the main area in the middle. And then once I've pressed it that way, I turn it. Oops. I turn it and I press it again along those sides that I didn't get the first time. So see, this is actually inside of here. This is your cuff and your hem allowance all together. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little sample over to the sewing machine and I'm going to hem the edge of this hem allowance. Now there's several ways you can do this. If you're sewing a pant for an actual pant, not a sample, you want to finish this edge off in some manner. Serge, zigzag, turn under if you want. Multiple ways of hemming this hem allowance. Remember, our hem allowance is about 1 inch in here. You can turn it under and edge stitch it to the surface like this so that you would have a little stitch inside here. That's perfectly fine because it's going to get covered with the cuff anyway. If you don't want that to show, you could also do a blind hem on this edge, and I'll show you just in a moment how to fold it for that. Other ways of doing it would be hand stitch. You could do a cross hem stitch. So there's multiple ways of sewing this. But make sure you finish this edge off, either with seam binding, some sort of stitch to cast it off so that you don't get raveling and you get a lot of strings in here. I've chosen to do mine with a blind hem. So what I'm going to do, I've got it folded like this. The next step is I'm going to turn the entire leg part, the sample of the leg, just like this, so that I've got a 1/4 inch of the hem. See the hem allowance right here is going to be sticking up. And I'm just going to pin it, and I'm going to go along through here, making sure I've got a 1/4 inch of the hem allowance sticking up past the folded back side. This way I can leave room, it leaves room for the blind hem stitch. So once I get this all pinned, we'll go over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to do the blind hem stitch. See, just like that. Alright, so let's go to the sewing machine and we'll go ahead and put the blind hem in. I have my sample turned inside out now, and I'm looking at the underside of my fabric. This is my hem allowance, just the edge here for my blind hem, and it's turned up under here with my cuff fold right here. See, there's my cuff fold, and I've got everything pushed up inside of here. And I've taken the plate or the table part off of my machine, and I'm getting ready to do my blind hem. And I want to talk to you about the blind hem. My foot that's made for this has a little ridge in here, but for some reason the way it aligns, it may or may not catch my fold. The idea of the blind hem is it's going to stitch over here, single stitch, and then come out one zigzag and catch this fold, go back, stitch, catch it this fold. And this foot is supposed to allow for that to happen, but for some reason mine doesn't align. So I'm going to show you the old school way of just using your regular foot to do this stitch. I've set it on 9, which is my stitch sample that does the blind hem. I've got it on the widest width it'll allow me to do, which is 3, and I've got my stitch length at 2, which gives me about a 3/8 inch gap between my stitches. Now, if you notice your needle position, this is real important so that you get this right and you don't get frustrated. When the needle is sewing straight, it will be on the right hand side. It's not set up in the middle, it's on the right hand side. The only time it comes into the middle is when it does the zigzag to catch the fold. Now, knowing that, if you keep the fold right here of your fabric lined up with the little center gap right here in your foot, just keep it right there, then you're going to be right in position to catch that fold every time. Now, adjusting the width of this, if it's catching too much, I can back down on the width and make it a little bit smaller. If it's a very thick fabric, you might have to move it over a little tiny bit. But if you'll start with keeping the fold right in the gap of your foot, then you're going to probably have a lot more success and not get as aggravated with the blind hem stitch. So let's get started. I'm going to start off right here. I'm starting at my seam. I'm just going to go slow. And if you're having trouble keeping the speed where you need it to be, use your moderator and get that speed down. I've got mine set on medium so I don't go too fast. Now see, it's sewing straight right now, and then it's going to come over, grab the fold, and if I keep my fold in the middle of that foot gap, I don't have to look at anything else. I'm not going to be all over the place. It's going to catch it every time, and I'm going to have a nice stitch. So I'm just going to go around through here, keeping my fold right in the middle of my foot. That's all I'm looking at. I don't care about anything else. As long as that fold and that foot line up, it's going to catch where I want it to. So just keep going around through here. Remember, go slow. This is something you really want to go slow at, otherwise you're going to be doing it again. So we're going to go all the way around through here, that little bubble there. And then when we finish with this, I'm going to show you how to finish folding the cuff. Now we have our blind hem stitch right along the little margin of our hem allowance, and it's caught, as you can see as I pull on this, it's caught the fold very nicely. Just keeping that fold right in between the gap on your foot will line you up, and that's all you really need to know about it. Now, once we have this, we're going to turn it back around so that we're looking at the right side of our fabric. And I'm going to get it all straightened out. You can barely see where the blind hem has caught this stitch. It's just almost like a little hand stitch in there. It's quite nice. So now we're going to press it nice and flat before we develop our cuff. So I'm going to get it really flat. I'm going to turn it and take the two rounded folds and press them flat as well. So now it's nice and flat and it's ready to develop the cuff. So you're going to need a ruler or a tape measure or a seam gauge to figure this out. My cuff is 1.5 inches wide. So this is going to be the fold line of my cuff. So I want to turn it up and get it turned up first, keeping the seam allowance up inside, and I'm going to start at the seam and I'm going to measure up 1.5 inches here, and when I get my 1.5 inches, I'm going to pin it. So let me go down just a little bit farther here. You want to be accurate here so that you get this spot on. Now if you've marked the outside of your fabric, you can find the fold and use that as well. But just make sure your marks are accurate so that when you start folding, you don't have a lopsided cuff. Or, worse than that, you get one turned up more than the other and you've got one pant leg shorter than the other. Not quite what you're looking for. So I'm going to keep going around through here. I'm going to put 4 pins in first, and then I'll come back if necessary and put additional pins. I just love this look. It's a real crisp look. It really looks good on a cropped summer pant, or in the winter a trouser like a wool plaid or gabardine trouser. This is a really nice look. Now I'm just putting an extra few pins in here where I feel like I need them because I want this cuff to remain 1.5 inches all the way around through here. So just make double sure that you've got a 1.5 inch turn up for your cuff. Okay, so now we're going to gently press it. Now I'm going to press it once with the pins in it, and then I'm going to take the pins out and give it an additional press. So all pins out, and then I'm going to press it really nice and flat all the way around. And folding it again. I don't want to press a crease in it, so I don't press the edges. I always press the inside and then just rotate my fold. Now, if you can see this, see how nice that is? That's the nicest little cuff there, which would be beautiful on the bottom edge of a pair of pants. Now, to keep this cuff from rolling down while you're wearing it, it's a nice idea to tack it right here at the seam. Now, I'm going to talk to you about tacking options. One option is to do a little stitch in the ditch right in here. Now what I suggest, if you do stitch in the ditch, which is sewing right inside the seam right inside the seam line itself, don't sew through the edges. Don't sew through the fold of the cuff nor the top fold of the cuff. You want to sew about 1/4 inch from the top and come down about 1/2 inch, and that's where you would do a stitch in the ditch. Now if you don't want this look, or this look is going to be too obvious on, let's say, a lighter weight solid fabric, then do this to it. Take this little cuff and flip it down just a little bit. Take a hand needle. I'm going to do it this way so you can see. Take a hand needle. I'm just going to temporarily pin it so I can get my hand needle in here. And you want to just do a little tiny tack stitch right here. So I'm going to just tie my thread off. I'm using a single thread because I don't want it to get too bulky. I'm barely picking up fabric, and I'm just going to take the inside edge of my cuff, just a little bit. Don't want to go all the way through so it shows on the outside. And I'm going to go once and twice right there. And then I'm going to come over to the other side of the seam and do the same thing. Go once and then twice, making sure I'm only catching the inside edge of my cuff. And then I'm going to come back on the pant part of the leg, and I'm just going to make a loop, tie my knot, make another loop, and now I've got a double thread, but that's okay. Make another knot. Make sure when you do this loop knot thing, you want to make sure your thread isn't twisted, because if it's twisted, you're going to end up with a big mumbo jumbo of thread. Let me just pull this a little bit taller so I can get that little loop out of there. Come on, thread, work with me. Sometimes if you get a little loop, if you just take the single thread and you pull it, you can get it out of there. Whoop, didn't happen. Okay. Anyway, that's tacked, and then I can come back and I can just press my tack like that. See, and now it's going to help hold the cuff up. Isn't that nice? Little cuff pant leg. Very simple. All you got to remember is the folding. That's the hard part about this.